Right now, inside your brain, there is a literal physical traffic jam happening.
Oh, totally. A massive one.
Yeah, you've got electrical signals firing at like 200 miles an hour, racing down these microscopic superhighways, and then suddenly they just hit a wall of tissue.
They just stop dead.
Exactly, they stop dead. And the result of that crash, basically someone standing in front of you just smiled, looked you right in the eye, and asked a totally basic question, something like, hi, how are you?
Right. The easiest question in the world.
And instead of answering, you were just staring back at them in pure, terrifying, unadulterated silence. I mean, your
Oh,
pupils might be dilated.
Your heart rate is definitely
You're
spiking.
probably physically sweating, right? And you cannot find a single word to say.
Yeah, it's a full-blown biological event. I mean, it really feels like a psychological failing in the moment, but it is actually a neurological cascade.
It really feels like you're just broken, you know?
Exactly. Because, well, we like to imagine that our brains are these perfectly organized filing cabinets or, these high-powered computers where we can just click a folder and instantly retrieve a file.
Right.
But in that specific moment of panic, when that conversational pressure hits you, it is as if someone just violently yanked the power cord right out of the wall.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, the hard drive spins down, the lights go out in the filing room, and you are just left grasping at absolute air, desperately searching for a vocabulary word that you know for an absolute fact you learned like 3 years ago.
That is the exact feeling. I think everyone listening to this deep dive right now knows that exact agonizing paralysis. Because, well, here's the great paradox of learning English, right? You can read it perfectly well.
Yeah.
You probably understand almost all of this conversation we're having right now. You can watch Netflix and, occasionally completely ignore the subtitles.
Oh, yeah, you're tracking the plot perfectly.
Right. And you have spent hundreds of hours memorizing these endless lists of vocabulary words. You've agonized over grammar rules and drilled irregular verbs until you're blue in the face.
So it's clearly not a lack of knowledge.
Exactly. The data is in there. It
Yeah.
is entirely a lack of access.
Which is, quite honestly, the most frustrating place to be as a learner. You're basically trapped in this gap between knowing something passively and actually being able to wield it actively.
And that gap is exactly what we are going to try and bridge today, because the mission of today's deep dive is to explore this really fascinating framework that our sources refer to as Chian Tut Tu Di Ting An Tu Nien.
Which translates to natural English thinking tactics.
Right. We've got this massive stack of source materials, transcripts, research papers, expert language learning sessions, and we are going to really unpack the actual hard neuroscience of how you train your brain to think directly in English.
We are talking about completely bypassing that exhausting, panic-inducing process that we call the translation trap.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we are not going to talk about flashcards today.
Please, no. No.
We're not going to talk about taking more grammar tests or like staring at a textbook until your eyes cross. What's fascinating here is that achieving true fluency is actually this biological rewiring process.
It's physical.
Yeah. We are going to look at the evolutionary biology of the fight or flight response and how to manipulate the actual phonetic biomechanics of your mouth. Plus, the specific daily habits that basically force your brain to build new physical architecture.
The whole goal is to move you from this state of heavy, exhausting mental translation into a state of spontaneous, natural communication.
Okay, so I want to start by putting this translation trap under a microscope, because I feel like before we can fix the freeze, we really have to understand the mechanics of the freeze.
Make sense?
Our sources outline something they call the four-step exhaustion, and I'm trying to picture this physically in the brain. Walk us through what is actually happening in the cognitive machinery during those really heavy, awkward pauses when someone asks you a question.
Well, let's look at the cognitive load. When you are stuck in the translation trap, your brain is essentially doing 4 times the mechanical work of a native speaker.
4 times.
Yeah, 4 times. Let's take a very, very simple scenario. A colleague walks up and asks you about your weekend plans. Step 1. Your auditory cortex has to receive the English audio, process the phonetics, and send it to Wernicke's area just to comprehend the meaning.
Okay, so just hearing and decoding it.
Right. Then comes step 2, and this is where all the trouble starts. You take that raw meaning and you actively, consciously translate it into your native language inside your head.
So you're basically acting as your own UN interpreter.
Exactly. Then, step 3, you formulate your personal response in your native language.
Yeah.
You figure out what you actually want to say about your weekend. And then step 4, You have to translate that native response back into English, check it for grammar errors, send it to Broca's area to formulate the speech plan, and then finally you open your mouth to speak.
I am exhausted just listening to you list those steps.
Right.
No wonder it takes so much time. You're running this massive, heavy computational process just to say, like, I'm going to the park.
Exactly. It requires an immense amount of metabolic energy. I mean, the brain runs on glucose, and doing all that, you were just burning through it so rapidly. Natural communication, what we call true fluency, only actually requires 2 steps.
Just understand and respond.
Yes, you understand the input, and you form an immediate response.
Mm-hmm.
When you force those 2 middle steps of internal translation into the mix, you create this massive cognitive bottleneck.
So it makes me think about how computers manage memory, actually.
Oh, how so?
It feels like the difference between a hard drive and RAM, like passive vocabulary, the words you can read but can't speak, is buried deep on this massive, really slow hard drive.
I like this.
Right. If you need a word, the computer has to spin up the disk, search through thousands of folders, find the word, and slowly load it up. But active vocabulary is like RAM. It's loaded right there at the front of the processor, instant access, ready to go the millisecond you need it. Is that a fair way to look at it?
That is a phenomenal analogy, honestly, and it maps beautifully onto the neuroscience. Your passive vocabulary is stored in long-term memory networks, and they're distributed all across the cerebral cortex.
So it's in there, it's safe.
It's safe, but it's really slow to retrieve. To use it in a live conversation, you have to pull it into your working memory, which is your brain's RAM. But here's the catch: working memory is incredibly limited.
Like you can only hold so much at once.
Exactly. We know from cognitive science that human working memory can only hold a handful of items at any given time. When you're translating back and forth, you are essentially filling up all your RAM with the translation process itself.
Oh, wow. So the software takes up all the space.
Yes. There is literally no space left to retrieve the actual vocabulary word you need. The system just crashes. You freeze.
So the RAM gets totally maxed out just trying to run the translation program. That makes total sense. Now, to explain how we actually move words from the hard drive into the RAM, the sources use this concept of neural pathways. They compare the brain to a dense forest. But I actually want to push back on this a bit because I have a different theory.
Oh, okay. I'd love to hear it.
Well, let me set up their forest idea first for the listener. The sources say that when you first learn English, your brain is like this wild, overgrown forest. There is no clear path from concept in your mind directly to the English word.
Right, it's just wilderness.
So to communicate, you have to push through all the bushes, hack away at the branches, and it's agonizingly slow. And that hacking through the bushes is the act of translating.
Correct.
But if you walk that exact same route every single day, eventually you wear down the grass, the branches break away, and eventually a clear, smooth dirt path forms. In the brain, this is the buildup of the myelin sheath, right?
Yes, myelination. It's this fatty tissue that insulates the neural pathways, which allows those electrical signals to travel much, much faster. It's the biological mechanism of fluency.
Okay, so I accept the biology, but here is my problem with the forest analogy. They make it sound like translating is this terrible, awful habit you just have to avoid from the start.
I see where you're going.
But I look at it more like driving a daily commute. Like when you first move to a new city, you absolutely need your GPS for every single turn. You have to actively process every street sign. You are actively translating the map to the real road.
Sure.
But eventually, after driving it for a year, you pull into your driveway after work and you don't even remember the drive. Your brain just executed the entire route on autopilot. My point is, isn't the GPS necessary? Don't you have to push through the bushes initially? You can't just magically teleport to the destination. Translating seems like a mandatory first step, not a trap.
You're touching on a really crucial nuance here, and I'm glad you brought it up. You're completely right that using the GPS or translating is absolutely necessary when you are a complete beginner.
Right, because you don't know where you are.
Exactly. You don't have the architecture yet. You have to use your native language as scaffolding to understand the new concepts. The trap isn't that you translate on day one. The trap, and this is what our sources are deeply concerned with, is what happens to intermediate learners.
Ah, the people who have lived in the city for 5 years and still can't drive to the grocery store without Siri telling them to turn left.
Precisely. That is the translation trap. You might have an incredible vocabulary on your hard drive, but you are still relying on the GPS out of pure, stubborn habit.
So why do we do that?
The reason for this goes all the way back to evolutionary biology. The brain is inherently lazy. And I don't mean that as a judgment. I mean it as a strict survival
It
mechanism.
wants to save energy.
Yes. The brain uses about 20% of your body's total energy, so it is constantly looking for ways to conserve glucose. The translation pathway going through your native language first feels very familiar, it feels safe, and it's heavily myelinated.
So it just takes the road it already knows.
Exactly. The brain prefers it because it's a known quantity, even if it's incredibly slow and inefficient in a real-time conversation.
It's the path of least resistance.
Exactly.
Well,
If you do not actively, consciously force your brain to turn off the GPS, it will never take the metabolic risk of building a new, direct English pathway.
wow.
Think about it. Why would it spend all that energy clearing a new path through the forest when the old, clunky path still technically gets you there? You have to deliberately force the brain out of its comfort zone to trigger neuroplasticity.
Which means we have to completely change what happens inside our heads when no one else is around. Because if the translation habit is an internal process, the cure has to be an internal process. This shifts us away from just understanding the trap and into the actual toolkit. Let's talk about internal rewiring.
Let's do it.
Because if we don't fix the internal monologue, we're never going to survive a real conversation. The sources highlight a tactic called mental substitution. Walk us through what the listener should actually be doing here in their daily life.
Mental substitution is the foundational habit for building those direct pathways. It is all about catching your automatic native thoughts in real time and intentionally rephrasing them in English.
Like talking to yourself.
It's talking to yourself, but strictly inside the confines of your own mind. The sources provide a beautifully mundane example for this. Let's say you wake up, you walk into your kitchen, and you start making your morning coffee. Your natural, instantaneous thought in your native language might be, I need more sugar.
Right, a completely throwaway thought. Most of the time, we don't even realize we're actively thinking it.
Which is exactly why it's the perfect training ground. The tactic is to catch that thought, hit the pause button in your brain, and actively translate it into English. I need more sugar.
Okay, so just a quick translation on the fly.
Yes. Now, if you stop there, you've done a good job, you've cleared a few branches in the forest, but the sources emphasize a critical next step called the multiple pathways rule.
Wait, let me guess. If you only ever translate it as, I need more sugar, you're just building one tiny, fragile path. And if you get stressed in a real conversation and forget the word sugar, that single path gets blocked and you freeze again.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
We tend to view language like a math equation. We act as if there was only one correct, perfectly translated answer for every single thought.
Which isn't true.
Right. Language is dynamic.
Yeah.
It's about expressing meaning. So the multiple pathways rule forces you to challenge yourself. You stand there in your kitchen, holding your coffee, and you try to express that same desire in 3 different ways.
Give me an example.
You think, this coffee isn't sweet enough. Then you pivot and think, I'd like to add some more sugar. Then you try a third angle. This needs to be sweeter.
Oh, I see. You are intentionally carving out 3 different routes to the exact same destination.
Yes, you are creating a redundant neural network. And this builds immense cognitive flexibility.
Redundancy is good.
Exactly. Imagine you are at a business dinner, speaking English, and you want to complain about your coffee. But suddenly, your brain completely drops the word sweet from your RAM.
You just completely blank on it.
Right. If you only have one pathway, you panic. But because you've practiced the multiple pathways rule, your brain encounters the roadblock and immediately, frictionlessly, routes you down the alternative path, and you just say, I need more sugar. Multiple pathways create a biological safety net that prevents the freeze.
I love that because it really removes the pressure of having to find the perfect dictionary word every time. But this brings up a practical issue.
What's that?
If I, as a listener, try to suddenly flip a switch and think 100% in English starting tomorrow morning, I am going to be exhausted by 10 a.m.
Oh, absolutely.
It feels like trying to run a marathon without training.
It would be entirely unsustainable. The cognitive load would just be far too high. This is exactly why the sources advocate for a graduated approach to the inner monologue. They suggest starting highly bilingual.
Okay, how does a bilingual inner monologue actually work?
You don't suppress your native language at all. You allow yourself to think a thought in your native language, but then you immediately echo that exact same thought in English in your head. It is an incredibly low-pressure environment. There is no native speaker staring at you waiting for a response. There's no social anxiety. Nobody is judging your grammar. You are just giving your brain a safe sandbox to practice the mechanics of word retrieval without the threat of public embarrassment.
Okay, I can see how that really lowers the barrier to entry, but here's where I get skeptical. I've tried this kind of thing before, and it usually devolves into me just basically pointing at things in my head like, I am walking, the sky is blue, I am opening the door.
Right.
It feels like I'm narrating a children's book to myself. That might be fine for day one, but how does labeling the furniture in my living room prepare me for a complex debate at work?
It doesn't. And that is a very common plateau that learners hit. Labeling objects only exercises your noun retrieval. To actually prepare for real human interaction, you have to level up the monologue to mimic the complexity of your actual internal life.
So how do we do that?
You have to start having real opinions, hypotheses, and reactions in English.
Give me a concrete example. How do I go from pointing at a chair to having a complex thought?
The sources use a great example of observing a stranger on the street. Let's say you see someone wearing a really striking jacket. The beginner-level inner monologue, the pointing phase, is just thinking, nice jacket.
Very robotic, very literal.
Exactly. It uses almost zero cognitive processing. But the leveled-up inner monologue engages deeply with the environment. You force yourself to think, wow, that jacket is really stylish. I wonder where they bought it. It looks vintage. I'd love something cut like that, but maybe in a darker color like navy.
Oh, I see. You're layering in hypotheticals, expressing preferences, asking questions. You're actually talking to yourself the way you would talk to a friend.
Exactly. You are forcing your brain to access adjectives, conditionals, and real conversational structures. You are training the architecture of opinion rather than just the vocabulary of objects.
It's funny because I actually do this all day long in my native language. I am constantly internally judging people's outfits or silently analyzing a conversation I just had. You're just saying I need to manually switch the language setting on my internal judgment from my native language to English.
That is exactly it. And there is a real neurological reason why this is so effective, which brings us to one of the most compelling insights in all the source material: linking emotion to language.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to build strong neural pathways quickly, you cannot rely purely on cold intellectual memorization. You have to leverage your limbic system.
Okay, this was my absolute favorite part of the entire stack of research. The advice is to intentionally express your strong emotions, your joy, your frustration, your surprise, directly in English.
Yes.
So if you drop your keys in a puddle, you don't curse in your native language, you force yourself to think in English, this is so annoying. Or if you finally fix a bug in your computer code, you think, I'm so glad that finally worked. When I read this, a massive light bulb went off for me. This explains a universal phenomenon.
Let me guess. Swearing.
Yes. This is exactly why people learn swear words in a foreign language so unbelievably fast.
It's the exact same biological mechanism at play.
I mean, think about it. You can spend 6 agonizing months trying to memorize how to use the past perfect progressive tense, and you will still forget it during a test. But you go to a foreign country, you stub your toe, and a local yells one good, colorful swear word at you, and that word is locked in your brain for the rest of your life. You will never, ever forget it, because it's tied to this raw, unfiltered, visceral reaction.
What you are describing is the power of the amygdala. This raises a fascinating point about how the human brain prioritizes information retention.
Break that down for us.
Well, the amygdala is this small almond-shaped structure deep within the temporal lobe, and it is a core component of the limbic system, which processes emotions. Evolutionarily speaking, the amygdala's job is to flag experiences that are critical for survival.
Right.
So if something causes you pain, fear, extreme joy, or surprise, the amygdala releases neurochemicals that signal the hippocampus to encode that specific memory deeply and permanently.
So it's essentially a giant biological highlighter pen. It highlights the moment and says, do not forget this. It might save your life later.
Exactly. When you are reading a dry grammar textbook, your amygdala is completely dormant. The brain sees the information as low priority.
It's boring.
Right. But when you tie English vocabulary to a genuine emotional spike, when you force yourself to express your anger or delight in English, you are manually triggering the amygdala. You are tricking your brain into tagging that language as highly significant. By doing this daily, you are making English the language of your actual feelings, not just an academic exercise.
You are integrating it into your core identity.
Precisely.
That is profound.
Well,
We are basically hacking our own survival instincts to learn vocabulary. Okay, so that covers the internal engine. We are catching our thoughts, we're building multiple pathways, upgrading our inner monologue to complex opinions, and using our emotions as highlighters.
a solid foundation.
But here's the problem. An engine cannot run without fuel. Talking to yourself is incredibly effective, but eventually you are going to run out of vocabulary. If your internal monologue is the engine, you need to pour fuel into it.
Yes, you do.
And that brings up a massive issue because according to our sources, most learners are putting the completely wrong kind of fuel into their brains.
Input is absolutely critical. But you're right, there's a massive danger in consuming the wrong kind of input. Learners generally fall into two extremes, and both of them stall their progress completely.
Let me guess. It's either way too easy or hilariously too hard.
That's it. The first mistake is sticking exclusively to content that feels comfortable. You watch YouTube videos made for beginners, you understand every single word, and you feel this great sense of accomplishment.
Which feels nice.
It does, but neurologically, there is zero growth happening. Your brain is not being challenged, so it doesn't bother building new pathways.
And the second mistake.
The second mistake is the overachiever's trap, jumping straight into highly advanced native-level content.
Right. You decide you're going to achieve fluency by watching, like, dense political debate on CNN or listening to a 3-hour podcast on quantum physics or reading a peer-reviewed academic journal.
Yes.
And 3 minutes in, you're completely ground. You've understood maybe a handful of prepositions, your brain shuts down, and you just feel hopeless.
It's completely discouraging and honestly biologically useless because the gap between what you know and what you are hearing is just too wide for your brain to bridge.
So how do we find the balance?
The sources rely heavily on a linguistic principle called the 70% rule for comprehensible input. This is the absolute sweet spot for neuroplasticity.
The Goldilocks zone. Not too hot, not too cold.
Precisely. The rule states that when you are reading an article or listening to a podcast in English, you should aim to understand roughly 70 to 80% of the material effortlessly, without using a dictionary.
Okay, 70 to 80%.
Right. If you do not understand more than 30% of the words, the content is too dense. Put it down, walk away, and find something easier.
But wait, let me push back on this a bit. Why 70%? If I only understand 70% of a business email, I might make a massive mistake. Why wouldn't we aim for 95% comprehension? Why do we actively want 30% of the material to be a confusing mystery?
Because that 30% gap is where all the actual learning happens.
Mm.
Yes. At 70% comprehension, you have enough surrounding context, from the words you do know, the tone of voice, the subject matter, to accurately guess the meaning of the new words you don't know. And that act of guessing, of bridging the gap using context, is how the brain naturally acquires language. As the source transcript points out, this is exactly how babies learn their first language.
Oh, that's a brilliant comparison.
Nobody hands a 1-year-old a dictionary and says, here, look up the word bottle so you know what I'm talking about.
Right. The parent just holds up the bottle, shakes it, points to it, and says bottle over and over again while handing it to the baby. The baby doesn't know the word, but they have 70% of the context.
Exactly.
Like, I am hungry, this object has milk in it, my parent is making this sound. The brain connects the dots.
Exactly. They learn through context, physical experience, and exposure to ambiguity. By reading or listening at the 70% level, you force your adult brain into that exact same state of natural acquisition. You train your brain to tolerate ambiguity.
Which is huge because most learners panic when they hit a word they don't know and they immediately reach for Google Translate.
Yes, the panic response.
Yeah.
The 70% rule trains you to suppress that panic, look at the surrounding sentence, and deduce the meaning. It builds cognitive resilience.
Okay, I buy the 70% rule for reading. But what about watching authentic TV shows? When you watch a real English movie, the actors are speaking incredibly fast, they are slurring their words, using obscure slang, and overlapping their dialogue.
Oh, it's chaotic.
Right. You can easily drop way below that 70% threshold just because you can't parse the sounds. The sources have a very specific pro tip for this involving subtitles, right?
They do, and it's highly actionable. First, a cardinal rule. If you are going to use subtitles, they must be in English.
Never native language subtitles.
Never, ever use subtitles in your native language. If you have your native language on the screen, your auditory cortex basically shuts off, and you are just practicing your native reading speed. You aren't learning English. But the real pro tip is a technique about visual priming.
Visual priming, okay.
When watching a show with English subtitles, train your eyes to glance at the next line of dialogue just a split second before the actor actually speaks it.
That sounds almost like a magic trick. How does reading it beforehand help you hear it better?
It has to do with how the visual cortex and auditory cortex interact. When you read the words right before they are spoken, your visual cortex sends a signal to your auditory cortex, effectively saying, hey, get ready. These specific phonetic sounds are about to hit the ear.
Oh, wow.
It primes the brain. It bridges the gap between the clean, written word you easily recognize and the messy, fast, accented spoken pronunciation that might otherwise confuse you. Over time, this trains your ear to decode fast, connected speech incredibly quickly.
That is fascinating. You are essentially giving your ears a cheat sheet a millisecond before the test. Now, there's another concept regarding input that I found deeply counterintuitive. It's this idea of spaced re-exposure. Because my natural instinct, if I find a YouTube video or a podcast that I really want to learn from, is to just binge it. I will listen to it 5 times in a row on a Sunday afternoon until I feel like I've memorized every single word. But the sources say that is actually a terrible strategy for long-term retention. Why?
Because binging information only stores it in your short-term memory. It's like cramming for a test. You might remember it tomorrow, but it will be gone by next week.
Right.
Spaced re-exposure leverages how the brain actually consolidates memory over time, particularly during sleep. The technique is this.
Right.
You listen to a challenging podcast once today. Then you stop. You let it go. You go to sleep. 3 days later, you listen to that exact same podcast again.
Okay.
Then you wait a full week and you listen to it a third time.
So instead of compressing 5 listens into one day, you spread 3 listens across 10 days. I'm trying to think of an analogy for this.
Go for it.
It feels a lot like watching a really complex, mind-bending thriller movie, like Inception or Interstellar.
Oh, great examples.
The very first time you watch it, you are hovering right around that 70% comprehension level. You are just desperately trying to follow the main plot, figure out who the characters are, and understand the basic rules of the world.
Right, you're just surviving the plot.
But then you let it sit, and you watch it again a few days later, suddenly you're operating at 85%.
Okay.
Because you already know the main plot, your brain's RAM is freed up.
Yes.
Now you start noticing all the background clues, the subtle foreshadowing, the clever lines of dialogue you totally missed the first time. And by the third time you watch it a week later, you are completely relaxed, and you are quoting the lines effortlessly before the actors even say them.
That is a brilliant analogy, and it perfectly mirrors the neurological process of memory consolidation. When you listen to the podcast the first time, your hippocampus holds on to the new vocabulary. When you sleep, specifically during REM sleep, the hippocampus slowly starts transferring that data to the cerebral cortex for long-term storage.
So sleep is crucial.
Absolutely crucial. When you re-expose yourself to the material 3 days later, you trigger a chemical response in the brain that says, oh, this information has returned. It must be essential for our environment. This signals the brain to heavily myelinate those specific pathways. Every time you return after a delay, your brain is in a slightly more advanced state of readiness.
Okay, so we've got our internal monologue firing. We are feeding the engine with 70% comprehensible input. We are using subtitles to prime our auditory cortex, and we are spacing out our exposure to hack memory consolidation.
That's a great system.
It is. But here is the hard truth. Input is still fundamentally passive. As one of the sources warns, and this line really stuck with me, you cannot learn to swim just by watching videos of people swimming.
Exactly.
At some point, you have to get off the couch and get in the water.
You have to produce language.
Which brings us to the most intimidating part of the journey. Active output tactics. We have to start producing language. But how do we practice output if we don't live in an English-speaking country and we don't have a native speaker sitting in our living room to practice with?
The first output tactic is a direct extension of the inner monologue, but it brings the physical body into the equation.
That's called the self-talk narrative.
As a self-talk narrative.
The instructions are deceivingly simple. You narrate your daily physical actions out loud to yourself in an empty room.
Out loud.
Out loud.
Yeah.
So you're in the kitchen and you say out loud, I'm making breakfast, I'm taking the eggs out of the fridge, I'm turning on the stove, the pan is getting hot.
Okay, I have to be completely honest here. If I, as a listener, try to do this, I'm going to feel completely unhinged.
It feels crazy, I know.
If my partner or my roommate walks in while I'm loudly announcing that I am scrambling eggs, they are going to think I have lost my mind. What is the actual scientific benefit of doing something so deeply awkward? The awkwardness is real, but the cognitive benefit is massive. The key to this tactic is that you are doing it while your physical body is engaged in an automatic, mundane task: cooking, driving to work, folding laundry, doing the dishes.
Okay.
When your motor cortex is occupied with a familiar physical routine, it creates a unique state of mild distraction. It frees up your language centers to practice spontaneous, real-time production without the paralyzing pressure of overthinking.
Ah, so you're distracting the anxious part of your brain.
Exactly.
Yep.
You aren't sitting rigid at a desk sweating over a blank piece of paper or a grammar workbook. You are training your brain to physically form English sentences dynamically while in motion, which mimics the fluid, unpredictable nature of real conversation.
Okay, I can see the value in forcing the brain to generate language on the fly, but what about the physical sound of the language? Because you can know all the vocabulary in the world, but if your pronunciation and rhythm are totally off, native speakers still won't understand you.
Very true.
And that brings us to a technique called shadowing, or what I like to call the mimicry method. I've heard this term thrown around a lot. How exactly are we supposed to shadow?
Shadowing is arguably the most powerful tool for developing natural cadence. Essentially, you take a piece of audio from a native speaker. It could be a podcast, an audiobook, or a YouTube video, and you repeat what they say immediately after they say it.
Just copy them.
At the foundational level, you use the pause button. You listen to a single sentence, you hit pause, and you repeat it out loud, striving to match their exact intonation, stress, and pronunciation.
Okay, that makes sense. But the sources mention an advanced level of shadowing that sounds almost impossible.
The advanced level is continuous real-time shadowing. You do not hit the pause button.
Wait, really?
Yeah. You listen to the speaker, and you speak along with them simultaneously, just a fraction of a second behind them, like a tight echo. As they are finishing a word, you are saying it.
That requires an intense amount of cognitive focus. You're listening and speaking at the exact same time. What is actually happening in the brain and the body when we put ourselves through that? It sounds exhausting.
It is a serious workout, and that's the whole point. We have to remember the physical reality of language. Language is not just a cognitive abstraction floating in your brain. It is a highly complex motor skill.
Like playing a sport.
Exactly like playing a sport. It involves the intricate coordination of the muscles in your jaw, your lips, your tongue, and your vocal cords. Your native language has spent decades training those specific muscles to move in very specific habitual patterns.
Right. And English requires entirely different micro movements, different tongue placements, different airflow.
Exactly. When you struggle with pronunciation, it's often not because you don't know how the word should sound, but because your facial muscles literally do not have the muscle memory to produce the phonetics fluidly.
Your mouth literally doesn't know what to do.
Yes. Shadowing is quite literally physical therapy for your articulators. By forcing yourself to echo a native speaker in real time, you bypass your brain's tendency to filter the sounds through your native phonetic rules. You force your mouth to adopt the physical rhythm, the connected speech, and the intonation of English. You are retraining your biomechanics.
You're bypassing the brain and training the jaw. I love that. Now, this perfectly sets up the next output tactic, which I think is universally agreed upon as the most psychologically painful exercise in the entire deep dive.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
The sources call it the uncomfortable mirror. I'm talking about recording yourself speaking.
It is the ultimate unfiltered reality check.
The sources make a really compelling point here. They say that inside our own heads, we all sound like Shakespeare.
We really do.
We think our pronunciation is crisp, our grammar is flawless, and we sound incredibly fluent. But then you record yourself speaking for 60 seconds, you play it back, and you are horrified.
It's jarring.
You realize you are dropping the endings off of words, your intonation is completely flat and robotic, you're using the wrong articles, and you sound nothing like the smooth speaker you imagined. But here's the problem.
What's that?
Nobody, and I mean nobody, likes the sound of their own voice. Even in our native language, we cringe when we hear a recording, let alone in a second language where we know we are making mistakes. How on earth is a learner supposed to push past that massive cringe factor?
You just have to accept that the discomfort is the medicine. It is incredibly uncomfortable to hear your own flaws magnified, but that discomfort is temporary. The awareness it brings, however, is permanent.
The awareness is permanent. That's good.
Here is the harsh truth. If you only ever rely on a teacher or a language partner to correct your mistakes, you are outsourcing your self-awareness. You will only improve when they happen to be in the room to correct you.
Which isn't often.
Right. When you record yourself and analyze the playback, you develop a critical, independent ear for your own errors. Becoming your own teacher is unequivocally the fastest, most efficient way to achieve fluency.
Okay, I agree in theory. But if I hit record, speak for 2 minutes about my day, and listen back, I'm going to hear 50 different things I did wrong. I'll hear bad vowels, misplurals, weird pauses. I'm going to get completely overwhelmed and just want to delete the file and never speak English again.
Which is exactly why the sources provide a very strict, highly controlled framework for this called the Rule of Three exercise. It is designed specifically to manage cognitive load and prevent that feeling of overwhelming despair.
Walk me through it. How does the rule of three save me from quitting?
The protocol is simple. You choose a basic topic, maybe summarize an article you just read, you hit record, and you speak for 2 minutes. Then you listen back. But here is the absolute rule. You are strictly forbidden from writing down every single mistake you hear. You are only allowed to identify and select 3 specific, fixable things. That's it.
Just 3.
Just 3. So maybe you notice that you consistently forgot to put the "es" on third-person singular verbs. Maybe you realize you used the filler word 15 times. And maybe you notice that your sound is coming out like a D.
Okay.
You write those 3 things down on a sticky note. Then you immediately hit record again, and you speak on the exact same topic for another 2 minutes. But the second time, your only goal in the world is to fix those 3 specific errors.
Okay, that completely reframes the exercise. It makes it a manageable puzzle instead of a devastating critique. You don't have to tear down the whole house and rebuild it. You just have to paint one wall.
Exactly. By hyper-focusing on just 3 micro-adjustments, you actually create lasting behavioral change. It's targeted neuroplasticity. If you try to fix 50 things, you fix nothing. If you fix 3 things every day, your fluency transforms in months.
Okay, so we've done the internal work. We've optimized our input with the 70% rule. We've narrated our lives while driving the car. We've shadowed native speakers to retrain our jaw muscles. And we've survived the agonizing cringe of recording ourselves. We have built an incredible foundation.
We really have.
But eventually, inevitably, you have to open your front door, step out into the world, and talk to a real, live human being.
That's the whole point, right?
Yeah. And when you do, despite all of this preparation, things are going to go wrong. You will stumble. Which brings us to the final hurdle. Surviving the real world and managing the mental blocks and mistakes that happen in live conversations.
This is where the psychology of language learning becomes just as critical as the biology. Because you can have perfectly myelinated pathways, but if your anxiety spikes, the system shuts down. We have to address the deep-seated, paralyzing fear of sounding stupid in front of other people.
The fear of failure. It is the #1 reason people stay silent.
It is. But we have to fundamentally reframe what a mistake actually is. We have to remind ourselves of a core truth. The goal of language is not grammatical perfection. The goal is communication, the transfer of meaning.
That's a great reminder.
The sources highlight this repeatedly. Mistakes are not evidence of failure. They are the most effective teachers you will ever have. If you are not making mistakes in real conversations, it means you are staying way too safely inside your comfort zone, which means your brain is not being forced to adapt.
One of the sources shared a highly specific and frankly hilarious anecdote about this exact thing, and it completely proves your point about the amygdala and memory.
The bored versus boring incident.
Yes. For the listener, the source described a learner who was at a social gathering. They were trying to communicate that they currently had nothing to do, but instead of saying, "I'm bored," they confidently announced to the entire group of people, "I'm boring," which of course means I am an uninteresting person who puts people to sleep.
It's a classic, very common mistake. Confusing the ed adjectives, which describe a feeling, with the ing adjectives, which describe the cause of the feeling.
Right. And the learner described the immediate, visceral reaction. The hot flush of embarrassment, the red face, the awkward, suppressed laughs from the native speakers in the group. It was a moment of intense social pain.
Oh, I can feel it from here.
But here's the magic of the situation. Because of that intense, uncomfortable emotional reaction, because the amygdala flooded the brain with stress chemicals, the distinction between bored and boring was burned into their hippocampus permanently. They will never, ever make that grammatical mistake again for the rest of their life.
Exactly. The emotional sting of the mistake acts as an incredibly powerful mnemonic device. The mistake built the pathway. But we also need to address the opposite problem.
What's that?
What about when you don't even get the chance to make a mistake because you can't get a single word out? Let's circle back to the blank mind phenomenon we opened the show with. Why do we freeze in live conversations even when we know the vocabulary is safely stored on our hard drive?
Yes, let's solve the freeze.
It all comes back to the autonomic nervous system. Real conversations carry inherent social pressure. You are being perceived, evaluated, and you have a limited amount of time to respond.
The clock is ticking.
Exactly. That social pressure triggers a microspike of anxiety, and anxiety pushes the brain into a mild fight-or-flight state. When the brain enters survival mode, it diverts resources away from the prefrontal cortex, which handles complex cognitive tasks like second language retrieval, and focuses entirely on immediate threat detection. It literally, chemically, locks the door to your vocabulary.
So it is a biological defense mechanism, not a personal failing. You aren't stupid. Your brain just thinks it's being chased by a tiger.
Precisely. So how do we hack the nervous system to unlock the door? The sources offer two brilliant, highly practical, tactical solutions. Solution one is the strategic use of filler phrases.
Tell me more.
As a learner, you need to have a handful of pre-memorized, deeply automatic phrases ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Phrases like, let me think about that for a second, or that's a really interesting question, or how should I put this?
Oh, I love this strategy because it serves two incredible functions. First, it buys your brain 3 or 4 crucial seconds to calm the fight or flight response, lower the heart rate, and fetch the vocabulary from the hard drive.
Yes.
And second, it signals to the person you are talking to that you are engaged, you have understood them, and you are holding the floor. You aren't just staring at them in terrifying deer-in-the-headlights silence. It keeps the rhythmic tennis match of the conversation flowing naturally.
It acts as a cognitive pressure release valve. It stops the freeze before it solidifies. Now, solution two for the blank mind is even more important, and it requires a bit of humility.
Humility, okay.
The tactic is simplify the message. When we experience the cognitive lockup, it is very often because we are stubbornly trying to translate a highly complex, nuanced, philosophically rich thought from our native language directly into English, and we simply do not have the architectural pathways to support it yet.
The sources gave a fantastic example of this. Imagine a learner is asked about their future plans, and in their native language, they are thinking something highly complicated, like, I'm currently deliberating whether it would be more advantageous to pursue a master's degree in structural engineering, or if I should enter the workforce immediately to accumulate practical industry experience.
I mean, trying to run that complex of a sentence through the four-step translation trap on the fly will cause a catastrophic mental traffic jam. Your working memory will overload instantly. You will freeze.
Right. So the tactic is to instantly drop the ego. Drop the desire to sound like an intellectual academic. You ruthlessly simplify the core meaning of your thought. Instead of the massive structural engineering monologue, you just look at the person and say, I don't know if I should study more or get a job.
It is brilliant in its radical simplicity. You have communicated the exact same fundamental human dilemma, and here is the neurological magic of doing this. Once you get that simple, grammatically correct version out of your mouth, your anxiety immediately dissipates.
Because you actually said something.
Yes. The social pressure drops because you successfully communicated a complete thought. The amygdala calms down. And once the brain relaxes, the vocabulary doors unlock, and you can easily elaborate in the very next sentence. Maybe engineering, maybe working in a company. It's really hard to choose.
Simplify to survive the initial panic, and then elaborate once the nervous system settles down. That is incredibly practical, actionable advice. Now, as we bring all of this together, the sources wrap up by discussing the overarching mindset of a language learner.
A very important piece of the puzzle.
They stress the need for patience and self-compassion, which, let's be honest, is incredibly difficult when you just want to be fluent yesterday.
It is difficult, but understanding the biological timelines is crucial to preventing burnout and maintaining consistency. Myelin, that fatty sheath that speeds up your neural pathways, does not build overnight. It is a slow physical growth process.
So what kind of timeline are we looking at?
With 15 to 30 minutes of daily targeted practice, using the mental substitution, the shadowing, and the comprehensible input we discussed, you will start to experience small, encouraging wins in just a few weeks. You will notice random English words popping into your head naturally while you're doing the dishes.
That's a great feeling.
It is. But significant, reliable, conversational automaticity takes around 6 months of consistent neurological stress and recovery to solidify.
And during those 6 months, there will be brutal plateaus.
Oh, definitely. There will be long stretches, sometimes weeks at a time, where you feel like you aren't improving at all. You will feel stuck. But the key mantras echoed across all the source material are, don't be hard on yourself, and slowly but surely.
Slowly but surely.
You have to trust the biological process. Even during a frustrating plateau, when you feel like you are failing, your brain is quietly working in the background. It is reinforcing those neural pathways, consolidating memories during sleep, and optimizing the network, even when you cannot see the immediate conversational results.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and recap the incredible neurological journey we have just been on. We started by diagnosing the translation trap, that exhausting, glucose-draining four-step process that overloads our working memory and causes the dreaded conversational freeze.
We covered a lot of ground.
We explored how to break that habit by building a vibrant, multi-pathway inner monologue and how tying emotion to that monologue hacks the amygdala for permanent memory storage. We learned that we must feed our brains a strict diet of 70% comprehensible input, using visual priming with subtitles, and spacing out our exposure to maximize sleep consolidation.
All building up to the output.
Right. We move into physical action with the phonetic biomechanics of shattering and survive the uncomfortable mirror of recording ourselves by using the rule of three. And finally, we learned how to survive the real world by preloading filler phrases to calm the nervous system, ruthlessly simplifying our complex thoughts, and embracing the red-faced embarrassment of our mistakes as the ultimate catalyst for neuroplasticity.
It is a comprehensive, biologically grounded roadmap. It shifts the learner away from the passive illusion of memorization and thrusts them into active, agile, real-world communication.
But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day. As we push further into this decade, we were increasingly relying on artificial intelligence, large language models, and instant translation apps on our phones to do all this heavy lifting for us.
It's true, they're everywhere.
You can travel to a foreign country, point your phone at a stranger, and have it speak for you in real time flawlessly. But as we've learned today, true fluency is fundamentally about building biological neural pathways in your own brain. It's about cognitive flexibility. So the question is, by letting technology do the translating for us, are we actively destroying our brain's natural ability to form these connections?
That's a scary thought.
Are we outsourcing our cognitive resilience to an algorithm? The more we rely on an app to bridge the gap, the further we might actually be getting from true, spontaneous, unmediated human connection.
It is a profound neurological concern. If you never force yourself to push through the bushes, you will never build a path. Your brain will simply prune those unused capabilities away.
Exactly. Use it or lose it. So the next time you are in a conversation and you are tempted to reach for a translation app because you can't find the perfect, eloquent word, pause. Remember the biology. Remember the tactics. Deploy a filler phrase to buy time. Ruthlessly simplify your thought. Embrace the messy imperfection of the moment and try to say it yourself first. Because as one of our sources so beautifully put it, the fear does not go away by waiting, it goes away by doing. So the next time someone smiles, looks you in the eye and says, "Hi, how are you?" Don't consult the filing cabinet. Don't spin up the hard drive. Just take a breath, trust the pathways you've built, and speak.